All right. Thank you, everyone. I am Deborah Weiss, Director of the Workforce Science Project at Northwestern Center on Law, Business, and Economics. Thank you for joining us today at our session of Navigating People Analytics Careers. Excited to introduce our moderator, Richard Rosenow. Richard is a key thought leader in people analytics. He's now VP of People Analytics Strategy at Icona. And our guest today is Dan Trares of Cargill. So, Richard and Dan, take
Thank
it
you so
away.
much, Deborah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you to the Workforce Science Project for bringing us together. Dan is a longtime friend in this space. And Dan, I've been looking forward to this one to get some time to chat with you because every time we get together and chat, we have fun conversations. We go to different places, but I'll try to sing your praises here for a minute before I pass it over to you. Dan's had 2 decades in the space, is maybe a way to put it now. Building teams, growing organizations at DuPont, Tenneco, VMware, Cargill, if I'm getting that correctly.
Correct.
Being able to build out not just people analytics, but HR technology, starting to bridge those roles, really a thought leader and a pioneer when it comes to these different areas. So Dan, I'm delighted to have you on today, and thank you for being here. And if you could fill in maybe some other gaps for us on your career, your history, and how'd you get here? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this today. I think one of the things I'm passionate about around people analytics is the career path here is varied. And I think there's a lot of people, especially if you're not in the IO psych space, may be afraid to take a step into people analytics. And there's a lot of different paths to be successful in this space. And I'm someone who came in or out of school with a background in computer science engineering. So, hardcore computer programmer, hardware, software, kind of robotics situation going on. And I ended up in IT when I first started my career. And that took me to a couple different roles, eventually into the HR technology space. And I moved from HR technology to compensation just to learn more about what it is HR does and get to something in more of a practitioner role than just purely a technologist role. And I happened to work for an HR VP who was really data driven. And I was able to combine some of the technical skills in my background with the access to the data that I had to solve a lot of the questions that he had around the workforce. And no one else at the time in Eaton was doing that. And so when the company was ready to really invest in people analytics as a function, I was asked to step into the role. Now, obviously, I was doing this as a side project. So to think about doing, building a people analytics organization as an organization, as a full-time role was a big shift. But it was really the right time for Eaton to invest and the right time for me to make that change. And so we spent a lot of time looking at commonality of our data, making sure we understood what our stakeholders wanted, building out infrastructure, and getting to the point where we went from an organization of one, myself, to a team of 26 globally, working on all manners of projects from just day-to-day operational reporting to in-depth studies around effectiveness of various programs or effectiveness of pay practices, propensity models of loss. So really a fully featured people analytics organization. The problem I ran into is being in the top seat at a company as I'm trying to learn as I go really makes it hard to learn. And so I had to make a number of career moves to get myself experience in other parts of people analytics. And so every time I think about my career moves, I think about the reason I took that job developmentally. So VMware was a team that was in place, it was successful, and it allowed me to lead a high-performing team and really help accelerate them to that next level. DuPont, I came in right when they were doing their merge and spin with Dow Chemical. So combining two companies, moving product lines, and spinning into 3 different companies. That allowed me to practice people analytics in an organization that was going through a massive transformation and a huge amount of M&A activities, which really, when you think about the cost implications of labor and how we think about staffing those organizations, it's a huge problem. And it was really an interesting time to come into DuPont and help them build up that muscle. Tenneco allowed me to think about the full HR data supply chain as we implemented success factors. So getting not only how do we get the data in our system, and partnering with my partner in crime on that initiative around people, HR operations, as they were standing up ops, and think about how we get data in the system, how it's processed, how it's stored, and how that entire data supply chain is critical for good people analytics. And then being able to build a people analytics team in parallel to that to ensure that the work that was going on foundationally could be leveraged quickly from an analytics lens.
And then, once you have that, it's hard to let that go.
It is. It is, because you really have control over that full stack. And it means that you're not having to fight some of the battles around, well, this is why our data is bad. We have to go in and fix the process to get good information. And that is probably one of the bigger challenges coming into a role where you don't have that full visibility, and you've got to really work on the partnership with your technology and process teams to get that set up correctly. And that kind of brings me to Cargill. And this was an opportunity that came along and really is a place where I could put all this learning together, right? It's a large company. If you're not familiar with Cargill, it's the largest privately owned company in the US. We're a big agribusiness, and we're structured around our food products, our ag and trading businesses, as well as animal feed and nutrition. And so, massive company, 150-ish thousand employees worldwide. And it was a place where they've been transforming from a holding company to more of an integrated operating company. And that transformation created a lot of opportunities around people analytics and opportunities to pull multiple teams together and start to really scale what we can do. And so
Dan,
please.
I'll pause you there for a second, because you've said so many phenomenal things that I don't want to I'm too curious about, that I'll lose them if we keep moving. Because I think one of the earliest things you said there was, and we'll definitely get back to Cargill. I want to go really, really deep there. But you said something pretty early about ask to step into role and about developmental jobs. And I'd love to pull up that a little bit, because it's one of the biggest questions we get on this series is around, how do I get into people analytics? I want to get my first people analytics role. How do I go straight from undergrad to people analytics, or straight from master's program to people analytics? And I think 10 years ago, we kind of thought that people analytics would become a full stack pyramid of talent. The reality is, it seems like there's maybe it's valuable to take that first role in HR, that valuable to take that first role somewhere else and find your way in. Could you talk a little bit about how you made that transition from kind of from IT to HR to people analytics? Because I think that's a really valuable one that not enough people hear about.
Well, I would say that the transition from IT to HR was pretty seamless.
Interesting.
Very much analyst, project manager role in IT, similar work, just with an HR technology focus. And so the HR technology organization at Eaton rolls up to the CHRO, so I moved to the HR job family. So that one was a pretty easy transition, right? It's just different technology, different stakeholders, different focus. But when you're thinking about IT, that tends to be the day-to-day life anyway. That change from HR technology to compensation was a huge change.
Yeah.
I will say, and this is always a pretty interesting concept to talk about, but I was fortunate enough to work for a manager who had a pretty serious health concern. And I don't want to downplay his scenario. But personally, it put me in a situation where I was expected to do a whole lot more, a lot faster than I was probably ready for. And I had to be agile. I had to learn. I had to really ask a lot of questions and step into his role, which I was nowhere ready for, but I leaned on the partners that I worked with within the total reward space, within the leadership team of that part of Eaton. And one, it built really good relationships that have lasted me not only within Tenneco, or not within Eaton, but also throughout. In fact, the CHRO I worked for at Tenneco, I met in that situation at Eaton. And so being put in a situation where I was just tossed in the deep end and had to figure it out, you learn quickly how to navigate an organization. And that enabled, so then eventually my boss recovered, he came back, it was great. And now I had a lot of free time because I had gotten used to doing everything, and now I at my old job back, and it was much smaller than I felt like. And having that capacity then to help that leader I worked for, the VP of HR, answer the more difficult questions allowed me to explore a whole new space. And so I could navigate that organization better. I knew what that VP was thinking because I was working much more closely with him during my boss's absent period. And it just gave me a newfound confidence in that role to go out, explore, and figure out how do you do some cutting edge work as a side project.
Yeah, no, I love the story, and it's an interesting one because I'm kind of two minds where it's like, part of me is like, we should have better training programs. We should make people feel like they're capable for roles before they take them on, and we should invest in people, and we should pay people for what they're doing. The other part of me recognizes and realizes in my own career and kind of the story you're telling here, which is if you do take on that work outside, if you do take on those side projects, those side gigs, there is nothing faster for a career accelerant than taking on work you're not ready for and having to figure it out with the right guardrails, ideally. But either way, like that accelerant that you can bring to your career from taking on those early projects in jumping into the deep end can really take things off. And it's one that they don't teach you in a lot of programs, to take on work that you don't know how to do. It kind of orient people to do the work you know. So it's a good reminder, I think, to take on that work that we don't know how to do and figure it out a little bit, because everyone's doing that too.
Yeah. And not only that, but also then gives you the self-confidence to say, yeah, this new role might be a stretch, but I can figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. So when I went from the compensation role to now being asked to lead people analytics as a new function, or new COE, or whatever you want to call it, as part of a large global company like Eaton, it was that experience that allowed me to have the confidence to say, yeah, I can jump in and do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's hard. That's hard to find in a formal education program. But I think, okay, so I want to bring us back to Cargill. So one of the things I remember we chatted about at TALREOS last year was around 6 or 7 HR sub-functions where analytics was kind of scattered and spread and sitting, and that act of having to bring that together. I've heard of a couple companies kind of going through that, but not too many. I'd love to hear your experience kind of coming into Cargill, setting up the team, and how it's been going, because it's been about a year since we caught up on it.
Well, yeah. So when, just to get everybody grounded in where the situation came into.
Oh, please.
So people analytics at Cargill was, there were pockets of it. So, and again, I think there were about 6 different pockets. Some were just dedicated resources that one of the businesses hired. Some were part of an existing COE like Total Rewards or Learning. There was a small contingent of people analytics practitioners as part of the technology organization that existed. And my role was created to help bring all that together and then work to develop people analytics more at scale and deliver better, faster, more actionable insights to the organization. And so I came in knowing generally who the team was and what the current structure was. But one of the things that we really had to focus on is, how do we want to set up the team for success in the future? And a lot of that was guided by how we talk, or what I heard from the stakeholders. And so really talking to our key clients, what they had, what they didn't have, what was missing, what their challenges were, and categorizing all of that feedback into what are the biggest challenges we have to solve now to be successful long-term in the people analytics organization. And our structure was really designed to help solve those problems. So, for example, we didn't have any robust data governance at Cargill. So one of the things we needed to do was create a data governance organization. We needed to know what data we had, what the quality of our data was, where we had known gaps, and where we had gaps that we could solve. And there were some of our data elements that people had made assumptions around what they meant or how they could be used that were completely inaccurate once you start to dig in and do some data discovery. And so by formalizing data governance within the people analytics function, it gave us, one, a lot of really good foundation to work on to know where we had opportunities to enhance our data and where we could start using things immediately. It also gave us a really good partnership in with our technology and process team for them to understand where we had gaps in our data, where we had gaps in our processes that we could then close and improve our data quality. Because if you've ever tried to manage data quality on the consumption side, it's just a giant game of whack-a-mole. Every time you solve a problem, you're going to have 3 more pop up because you're not solving them at the very beginning of your data supply chain.
Very well said.
So data governance became a really big focus for the team. The second area was getting our arms around all of the, it's called tool proliferation that was going on. So we had hundreds of thousands of transactional reports out of our SuccessFactors environment. And we needed to work on
hundreds of thousands.
Yes.
Wow.
Because every time, well, maybe not that many, tens of thousands is probably more.
Hundreds. Let's make it big. I like the case.
It felt like hundreds of thousands. And every time there was a request that came in, if there was one field that was different, the team would create a new report. So that was an area where proliferation needed to be contained. We also had a lot of various dashboards that were cropping up because everybody wanted one. And so there wasn't a common set of metrics or common set of tools. There was one for every part of the business. I joked that some days it felt like dashboard day on the Oprah show. Everybody gets a dashboard. And, I think in the people analytics community, I've heard this a lot, and I do agree that dashboards aren't analytics. Dashboards help you understand your base data. And so as we were talking to our stakeholders about all these different tools and them not knowing where to go, well, one of the problems is they didn't know where to go because there were too many options. Second, every option had a slightly different lens, so you got different answers. And we need to step back and think about, well, why are we doing this? We're building these tools because we need to answer the basic questions of our stakeholders. And if we're not helping our stakeholders answer their basic questions, then there is no amount of strategic intent we can push with people analytics that they will be interested in, because I can't tell them what their headcount is, right? I do think that there is a hierarchy of needs when it comes to providing data to our users. And if you can't answer the very basic stuff, they don't want to know what's next. They want to know the basics.
Yeah, I've heard the phrase, basic questions pay rent.
Exactly.
You got to pay rent every day.
And so this product team became critical to driving standards, driving commonality, driving, one answer for the questions that are out there so that everyone's on the same page. And then we had what we called our consultant team. And this was more of the bespoke work that was going on. In all honesty, at the beginning, the consultants were just providers of data, right? They were helping our business partners navigate all the complexity that had been created. And now that we've been able to invest in our data governance, invest in our products, drive standards through the organization, the consultants can now focus on some of the bigger questions that are out there. They can do some of the more strategic initiatives. They're partnering with our real estate team to do space studies and understand our footprint and our location strategy. They are partnering with key parts of our organization to understand risk of loss for key talent. They're working with our total rewards team to look at various pay components and the effectiveness of those pay components. And so we've enabled our stakeholders to do a lot more self-service, which enables then the consultant side of the people analytics organization to do more value at work. And so going back to the initial question, as we looked at the challenges that we faced as an organization, we structured the team to solve each of those challenges and make sure that they understand the relationship between one another, right? The product team has to rely on data governance on how they use their data. The consultant should be a feeder into the product team backlog on how they can improve their products. And that operating model allowed us to address the key problems, the key concerns in the organization, while moving our product and our availability to answer questions forward.
That's so huge, and that interconnectedness of the teams is critical. I think a big question for you here, Dan. I think data governance is one of those things that is so wildly critical. The longer you're in people analytics, the more you realize the job is data governance first. The trouble is data governance doesn't produce results by itself. And it's only through the lens of the other two areas of your team that it can actually get to create kind of profit margin eventually for the company.
Sure.
Speaking very, very quick about that. How do you build the business case to go after data governance first when you know it has a little bit of a longer term payout? It's not a short term win a lot of the time. I'd love to hear you kind of make the pitch or make the case around that to help some folk on the line that might be dealing with that too, where they're like, I feel like I've got to keep doing small wins, but I know I have to fix my data model.
Just to touch on one thing you said, I actually would argue that change management is probably the most critical aspect of our job. But we can come back to that if you want.
Agree. I love it.
But data governance also, I mean, it's hugely critical because if you don't govern your data, you can't have reliability in your results.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think about some of the connection to AI, right? And using some of the new tools that are out there. We actually have done some work where we solve the question that gets answered or that gets asked, and then we ask AI the same question with the same data set, and it produces different results because the data that's being used isn't governed well. And we should use that as an example of why governance is important. Because if you have to rely on a team or a person to understand and interpret the data you're using, rather than having well-governed data, then you're always going to require some sort of intervention or some sort of step in the process to talk about what that data actually means. And you can't then get the value that can be generated through some of these great new tools that are coming out. The other thing that we've done in data governance, and I've talked to my data governance leader and explained to her that data governance is kind of like payroll, right? It's one of those areas that if it's going well, nobody talks about it. It only comes up if things are going wrong. And that's a tough place to be. And so one of the things that she and her team have started is to put together monthly measures of what are we seeing from a data quality perspective? What are we seeing from other core metrics they put forward? What are the types of privacy issues that have come up, that have come through the data governance team? How many data elements have an owner? How many don't? So we are very public within the HR job family around our data governance metrics. And we're doing that as a way to help talk about the value and importance of data governance and help the business see more of the quantification of why that's important.
Incredibly well articulated, Dan, and thank you for indulging me there to kind of go a little bit deeper. I definitely want to give you a minute to talk about change management, though, too, because that's one that I see a lot of teams realize kind of through wisdom and through multiple teams and going through this a couple of times that that's so critical. But we rarely see people analytics teams get investment to hire for change management roles. And I don't know if you've been able to crack the code on that somewhere at one of the roles, or if that's something that just falls on the head of people analytics. But it'd be great to hear you talk through that topic too.
Yeah, I think when we think about our product team in particular, one of the biggest challenges they have is adoption of new tools. And it's not because people don't want to use it. It's because they don't know, they're afraid, they are reluctant to go in and just kick the tires and see what it can do. Whatever it might be, there's a demand for the information. It's just reluctance in getting in there. And we're lucky enough to have a really great communications partner that we get to partner with and leverage anytime we deploy new functionality. And so we do a lot of change management. We do a lot of reinforcement as to why this metric is important to other things that are going on in the organization. So if we are providing more information into, let's just say, the position structure and organization structure and what that means for the overall organization and our cost metrics, for example, well, we want to make sure that we're governing and looking at that data differently. So we don't talk about it in terms necessarily of this is a dashboard. Obviously, we talk about what you can do and the data, but we also tie it to why it's important, why you need to know this for your job, how it ties to the things that you're expected to help maintain and have visibility and insight into. It's not perfect. Again, I think one of the biggest challenges we face from a change management perspective is our business partners are so busy. And so making sure you have a way to get to them where you've got their attention and it's not just something they've got on the side of their monitor while they're doing 10 other things. So we do a lot of repetitive content. When we have really big releases, my director of product has just hosted office hours every morning. And just to give people a platform. But, I don't have a great solution for it. In fact, we're still trying to do different things. Welcome any input anybody has on how to solve the change management problem. But that tends to be the biggest sticking point.
Yeah, it's one that I think a lot of teams grapple with because we realize even the data we produce, the reason we're producing the data is to create change. So just by nature of our function, we're a very change-oriented function. And I've seen a couple teams break through with a marketing hire every now and then. There's probably one back in the archive. I got to go mine the data there to see who it was. But that's ringing through my head about that. But it's a hard one because a lot of times on limited budgets, you get budget to hire doers, and you've got to do more work. And it's hiring the doers comes first sometimes. But let's talk about the. Oh yeah, please.
That perspective, the doers aren't necessarily change agents.
Yeah,
right? That's not necessarily.
That's the most polite way to say that.
A skill set that you see, to be really strong in one person, and so it's hard to get the right skills to drive it forward. And I think often we find somebody who kind of fits the mold and is a doer and kind of do change management, but it's a hard skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about your team in particular.
Yeah.
So we got the kind of large pillars. But we want to talk a little bit more about this senior product manager role. So you've got a role posted right now. Could you tell us a little bit about the motivation, the investment, what prompted this role? It'd be great to hear a little more.
Yeah. So our product team over the years has really been following an agile deployment methodology. And we have kind of taken an approach of let's try to come up with some different metrics views that solve whatever the problem is, and see what sticks. And we always have a couple of design sessions with our business partners. We've actually got a really great core we call Power User Group that they get a couple previews in each of the releases. They give feedback on what works, what doesn't work, and that helps a lot in framing some of our solutions. But it doesn't get as deep as we need as we're starting to mature. And so really making sure that we have the voice of the stakeholder prominently within our organization, somebody who can talk both to our business partners as well as to our developers is something that's missing right now in the organization. And so when we think about a product owner, we really want someone who understands the vision of what we want to do in our product space. They understand how our consumers want to think about data, how they want to consume data, what problems they're trying to solve. We want them to be very close to our key stakeholders, listening to them, and helping to curate an overall product rather than one that feels cobbled together through different questions. And so going back to change management, right, one of the things that we believe can help support that change curve is one, tools that are really well adapted to answering key questions and answering them really, really well. And tools that are consistent and easy to go between, right? If every dashboard, every tool you open up tends to feel like a new application and you feel like you have to learn something new, well, that's a bad experience. And by having a common product owner, we believe that we can also reduce that change curve that's required to enable our business partners.
Dan, that's an incredibly sharp take on this. And it's one that I think really hews true to the word of product management. And it's not one that most people typically jump to. I've seen a lot of product manager roles across people analytics teams that are actually like, you're in charge of operating the tech platform. We bought a tech platform. We need someone to run it. You're the product manager for it. You manage it, manage product. But it's very different than, I love what you're saying about vision, voice, and being able to articulate that change by bringing those things together. That's a That's a special role. So as you're thinking about that role, what types of profiles are you looking for? Who's out there that kind of fits this? Do they need people analytics background? Could they be coming in fresh? It'd be interesting to hear kind of what that early, without giving away too much of the process and the secret
Yeah.
sauce on different parts here. But yeah, what are you starting to
Um,
see?
well, as far as my ideal candidate, I think someone, right, the first thing that comes to mind for me is someone who's inquisitive, right? I think if you can ask really good questions, if you can really understand why this is important to our stakeholders, why this is important to a business leader, why this is important to an HR business partner, that's going to help us create and craft a better overall product. So someone who can ask those questions, someone who can really get into the mind of the people who are consuming our tools, somebody who can deal with ambiguity. I think if you try to ask 100 different HR practitioners what they want in a dashboard or how they think about analytics, you're probably going to get 100 different answers. So someone who
101.
101 exactly. So someone who can navigate that space and think about how you bring these really disparate ideas together to answer a common problem. And that's a tough thing to do. So someone who can really make sure that they are able to translate the HR practitioner world into the world of data, and they can do that well, becomes, I think, a really key component to the role. Obviously, the first profile that comes to mind is somebody with a people analytics background, someone who's done it before, who understands the nuance and complexity of human capital data. But I also don't think that that's a must-have either.
Yeah.
This is someone who has great organizational skills, an eye for detail, and can actually step in and think about that change curve as well, and how do we communicate what's going on.
That's helpful to hear. Speaking of eye for detail, I had my magnifying glass out and I was taking a look at the role in the job description, and I saw one of the lines was talking about Gen AI assisted analytics.
Mhm.
That's an interesting one, and it's one that's just starting to emerge in the space. I don't know how much you're allowed to share or can share, but could you talk a little bit about kind of what that means, maybe for this role or just for your team in general? It'd be great to hear how your team's pursuing, starting to dip a toe, or heading in the direction of Gen AI.
Yeah, so we're a Power BI shop, and Power BI has some Gen AI capability that they're introducing, and we'd love to be able to use it, right? I think myself, my consultants, get basic questions all of the time, right? How many people are in this site? Right? Great, you could use the dashboard, or you could ask someone, and sometimes if you're a high enough level, we'll answer you.
If you got
But
the backbone.
it'd be great if we could have some of the generative AI to answer those questions as well. But as I alluded to earlier, we still have some data governance and process and technology enhancements that need to be done before that can be solved. And so someone who can think about when and how we start to introduce that capability into our product, um, would love to have that view as well, because the more we can answer, again, going back to this hierarchy of needs, the more we can get the basic things easy to answer, easy to find your whatever the solution is. And if once the easy things are answered, we'll start to answer the more complex things. The more we can continue to self-serve up that hierarchy, the more we're able to then focus the people analytics function on things that are driving larger incremental value for the organization. And
Yeah,
so
it's
thinking about how we get into that Gen AI space, I think, is key to the product success.
I agree completely. And as you're talking about it, what's coming to mind is we've seen this call for productization of people analytics for the past decade. People said you should act like a product team, work like a product organization, but there's been a little bit of difficulty to hit escape velocity to say, okay, we can actually be a product organization, because to get enough resources, investment to go after it. The AI component to kind of leverage that as a way to build and scale products appropriately in the language of HR, in the language of the HRBPs and our clients understand and use, it does open up a real opportunity for escape velocity for these different teams. I'd love to hear your reaction to that, or just kind of if you're thinking along those lines for productization.
I completely agree. I'll go back to this concept that dashboards are not analytics, and I fully agree with that. Dashboards are a place to go to get your questions answered, and hopefully answered the same way and at scale. but it's not going to have every iteration that you may ever want. And so Gen AI is how we start to add that layer of additional functionality to answer questions that are not obvious through the dashboards. And then as we get to things that can't even be answered by the Gen AI, that's when we do more of the true deep dive study work with our consultant team to pull together multiple disparate data sets and help answer, why one location may be a better choice to open an office than another. Because now we're combining, external market data. We're talking about employees. There may be commute between location A, location B. There's a whole lot more that goes into it that we won't have everything plugged into a Gen AI. But if we can create the capacity to do those bigger studies, then overall we're creating additional value through that people analytics organization.
That's fantastic. Dan, this sounds like a fascinating role, an exciting time to be joining Cargill, exciting time to be joining Dan Trares on this journey too. If people do want to reach out to you or want to find out more about the role, do you have any recommendations for either apply online, I'm not allowed to talk to anybody, or send me a couple notes if you're very interested? Where do you fall on that?
If you're interested in the role, please do apply. That's the preferred method, is that we do get the application and we go through that process. I actually will give a quick plug for the hiring manager for this role. Addison Hodge, who is our director of product, is the one who is hiring. I know if you're connected to him on LinkedIn, he probably can answer some basic questions as well. I'd be happy to if I have some capacity to do that. But I will say my LinkedIn tends to be pretty backlogged, so I may not be the best choice for that.
Okay, so send notes to Addison. His cell phone number is. I'm just just making panic a little bit. Thank you, Addison, for that offer that Dan's making here. So I think let's shift gears just a little bit. And if for folk on the line, make sure you stay on. At around 45, we'll switch over to Q&A. So start thinking about questions you'd like to throw Dan. And if you're watching this on YouTube later, you missed out. You got to be here in person for the Q&A. So come by next time. But I'll think of. I've got a couple more questions here that I'd like to find, Mark. It's one of my favorite parts about this and having friends on is putting them in the hot seat to brag about themselves. And so hearing about things that your team's been working on, I'd love to hear, really honestly, let's go for a brag. What's something that you're proud of that your team's been able to accomplish at Cargill? What's something that jumps out to you that you could share with me today?
I think one of the things I'm most proud about the team is last year, there was a lot of focus within Cargill around our 10-year strategy and some of the foundational shifts that needed to be made to achieve that 10-year strategy. And a lot of the focus was on right-sizing some of our SG&A. And historically, Cargill has only ever operated with a finance lens when it came to labor. And so the team was able to very quickly mobilize, come up with data structures and some quick tools to understand the cost implications of our labor, understand what that looks like when it comes to various teams, various types of spans, layers, scenarios, and work with our various strategy teams, whether it's corporate strategy, HR strategy, and help model all of this information when it came to some of the transformative actions that were being undertaken in the company. And not only that, but then we continue to stay on and partner through the measurement of this. And so it was really, I think, a big change for Cargill HR to lead some of the cost measurements.
Oh, yeah.
The team. And this was, tools and products that were visible to the executive team. And so I think that just is one of the biggest examples of how far we've come within the people analytics organization at Cargill is, this was a team that when I joined, most of our HR business partners got their standard metrics once a quarter through PowerPoint. And that PowerPoint was a month stale by the time they got it. And now we have a monthly forum with the ET to explain how we are tracking to some of our organizational cost structure goals. And that is just a world of difference in 2 years.
That's fantastic. Congrats, Dan. I think that's no small feat to take over cost workforce reports from a finance-driven organization to start to run those out of HR. And it's to the benefit of the company with the granularity you could provide, with the depth of data you have, the nuances HR has. It's an underrated superpower that HR can provide if they get to the table, if they build the partnership, if they've proven credibility, if they've gotten the basics right. And there's a lot of ifs there before you get invited to do that. So Dan, that's a huge congrats to you and the team for that. I think as we're nearing the end of our call here, one of the biggest questions we get is for folk that are early in their career, if they're trying to figure this out, and we've talked a little bit about this earlier, but do you have any words of advice for learning about jumping in, getting involved in the space? Anything you'd like to pass on to folk that are looking to break into people analytics?
I would answer this the way I answer a lot of the career conversations I have with my team. And it's rather than thinking about a job, think about what are the skills that you need to be successful for that job. And then figure out how do you get those skills, right? How do you start to fill your bag of skills up through your career and through your opportunities that you have? If there's something you're missing for that first leap into people analytics, right? Let's figure out what that is. Let's figure out how to get that out there. And so really thinking about it versus a set of skills, set of capabilities, set of experiences you have, rather than just, this is the job I want, how do I get there? I think it starts to break down some of the actions you need to achieve what you want to do.
I think it's very well said. And events like this and talks like this are a great way to do it. Dan, thank you again so much for participating, for sharing, for being so open. For those on the line, don't go yet, but I do want to say thank you to Deb and thank you to the Northwestern Workforce Science Project. Thank you, Derek, for putting this together today. And with that, we will end our recording today.